Hello, listeners, and welcome to a very special episode today of Fungos and Fastballs. Well, special for me, at least, because to reference the Beatles, Selena Gomez, and 50 Cent, it's my birthday. Well, it's not really my birthday, that's tomorrow, but a day early we are dropping my birthday episode, and as such, I get to pamper myself and treat myself to special things, and one of those things is having a special guest today, my son Griffin Dynes, calling in from Denver to discuss a very special player that we'll reveal later. Hey, Griff, thanks for coming.
Hey, glad to be here, especially on such a special occasion.
Minus one day.
Yeah.
Well, if you've been following this podcast for the past 10 weeks of our existence, I try not to put it out there, but you probably have guessed, don't hold it against me, that I am a New York Yankees fan. You see our jerseys on today. But I really have been trying to avoid Yankee-related topics for the most part, do a balanced podcast, cover a lot of different teams and players. And hey, if we haven't gotten to your favorite player or team yet, send us a message, but we will, I promise. But today, as I said, is my day. So we are going to cover a very special player from my youth, my favorite player growing up, actually. But first, before we get to him, I thought we'd have a little fun. The entire Dynes family, including my wife and producer, who's always here, there she is, Brooke.
Hello.
Is a very musical family, and we are going to have some fun. And since we are talking about a New York team and we'll be going to New York again in the summer, we're going to talk about a musician associated with NYC, Billy Joel. I think I know the official answer. Billy's a little coy because he tries to be very supportive of New York in general. But do you guys want to take a guess who his favorite team is? Yankees, Mets, a non-New York team?
I would say between the Yankees and Mets, my guess would be the Yankees due to him having probably a good taste in baseball.
Well, don't alienate our Mets listeners.
I might go for the Mets because Billy lives out on Long Island and it's a little closer than coming into Yankee Stadium.
I think he does reference them in what is it? I think Stiletto, with he says, Pete Rose, Rosie knows you're such a credit to the game, but the Yankees grab the headlines every time. My understanding is that when he was young, he and his family were Brooklyn Dodger fans. Of course, the Dodgers left there in the 50s. And after that, he did kind of jump ship for the Yankees a little while. But as many Brooklyn Dodgers fans did when the Mets started up.
With Marvelous Marv.
Oh, we did have an episode on Marvelous Marv.
6 degrees of separation.
6 degrees of fungos and fastballs. He jumped to the Mets. So I think he leans a little more towards the Mets.
Okay.
So we're going to have a little fun, as I mentioned. And because this is the podcast of baseball history and trivia, we're going to start a trivia question about the Piano Man. And that is, he has an 89 song. 1989, We Didn't Start the Fire. And listeners, I hope you know it, but if not, Billy basically goes through about 118 historical and pop culture references. I've always joked one could totally get an expertise in the Cold War era if you read up on each of those references. I think there's actually a podcast that does one every episode. And we're going to say then, the question is, in that episode, how many baseball references are there? You want to guess a number?
All right, so Griff, we'll work together on this. Of course, we've got
I think
DiMaggio.
Brooke is ominously over my shoulder, probably looking at the answers.
He mentions Mickey Mantle at some point.
Okay.
So you've gotten two, yeah. Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle. There's your Yankee references. So
Yep. That's why I would know them. I wouldn't know the other references off the top of my head. Not the biggest fan of the song per se, but I'm gonna go with, since I don't think there's just two, I'm gonna say my guess for 4 baseball references, if Mom can think of any other.
China Johnny, right? You like 4? A very
George Taylor's a baseball
solid.
player?
Yes,
On the
yes.
side.
A very solid guess. There are actually five.
Oh,
You got Joe DiMaggio, the great Dodgers catcher, Roy Campanella. He does say Brooklyn's got a winning team, referring to that 1955 Dodgers win over the Yankees. Mickey Mantle, of course, you got. And then the last one, California baseball, which referred, of course, to the move of both the New York baseball Giants, and the Brooklyn Dodgers following the 57 baseball season. So 5. So a little fun we're having there. Hope you played along at home. If you don't know the song, that's a shame. It's a fun song. So with that in mind, let's start the episode. Hello and welcome to Fungos and Fastballs, the podcast of baseball history and trivia. I'm your host, Jerry Dynes. Let's jump into today's episode. So I was born in 1968, and so my first seminal baseball memories came in those mid to late 70s. Great teams, great players of that era, the Reds, the Pirates, the Dodgers, and of course, that great Yankees team that won 2 World Series in 1977 and 1978. And one cannot think of those 1970s Yankees teams without thinking of the great catcher and captain of the team, Thurman Munson, who was my favorite player growing up. Griff, of course, you were born much later. You didn't see the Yankees live back then, but I'm sure you've seen your dad wear his number 15 jersey.
yeah. Yes, I have. Yeah, plenty of times.
And by now, I'm sure you've seen footage and have some opening thoughts on Munson. Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, once again, not growing up in the time and really not really knowing much about the 70s Yankees aside from World Series and the bigger name, Reggie Jackson, usually. Doing a lot of research, it was very interesting to see the statistics behind him and find out a bunch of cool, fun facts throughout it. So, yeah, did some little research on it and excited to have this talk.
Yeah, going back to that era, of course, many people remember the Reggie Jackson years, the great Reggie Jackson, who joined the Yankees 477. But he was a flashy player. He was just out there. But really, the Yankees were filled with a lot of just hardworking, quiet players, some tough guys, Greg Nettles and, the wonderful Roy White, who was on the team for so long. And of course, none more than Munson, who was a Midwest guy, born in Akron, moved to Canton, lived in Canton throughout his Yankees tenure with his wife and 3 kids. And he really reflected the team. So if you were a Yankees fan, you kind of liked that quiet, gruff, maybe a little grumpy attitude. You were certainly grateful of Reggie's contributions to the team and those 2 World Series. And I used to love Reggie bars. You've never had a Reggie bar, right, Griff?
I have not. What's in them?
I was surprised that they are still on Amazon, and I am honestly thinking of getting a box, much to Brooke's dismay. But they're kind of these clusters, or like cow patties instead of bars. But they're chocolate with caramel and peanuts in them. And when they were introduced, I think Reggie hit a home run, and everybody threw them on the field, and the game had to be stopped to clean them up. But they're pretty good. I'm going to get them, Brooke. No. Along with the Big League Chew that we talked about that episode recently. But yeah, it was Munson's aura. I mean, one might not have known he was a devoted family man, but on the field, he was just tough. He was baseball smart. He had a great scowl and a great team leader. He was named, by George Steinbrenner, the owner, as Yankees captain in 1976. And this was the first time the Yankees had a captain since Lou Gehrig, who had retired in 1939, unfortunately due to health reasons. We've had Yankees captains since. I mean, people like Mattingly and Jeter and, of course, Aaron Judge now. But back then, it was like almost 40 years without a captain. And there was not really supposed to be a captain. But Munson just had that clubhouse. Mm-hmm. And Griff, I know you know that mustache.
Yeah, I was was thinking about honestly shaving the mustache in honor of today's podcast, but
That would have
decided
been
just to keep the
great.
full beard. But
Yeah, every
yeah,
guy,
no,
when he decides to shave the beard, decides to, let me see how things look with those
that's exactly it.
70s stash there.
Yeah, but he had the killer one, and as you said, even his looks were definitely more rough around the edges, and as we'll talk about later, that definitely led to him being a little bit less marketable, I would assume, than some other players at the time who he would compete with and bash heads with. So
Yeah, he didn't get the ad revenue or have certainly not the Reggie. Reggie definitely reporters flocked around. Munson was the quiet guy there. It was a great mustache era. Brooke wants to do an episode purely on mustaches. Goose Gossage and Raleigh Fingers and all those guys. Even Mike Schmidt, from the Phillies, more shorter. We're on video. I can do this now. So some early history. We definitely want to get some history out of the way. We talked about where he was born. He was a multi-sport player in high school: baseball, basketball, football. Originally in high school, he was a shortstop. He actually switched to catcher in his senior year. And he went to Kent State University. Go Golden Flashes. He was drafted by the Yankees, played in the minors a year, and so impressed them that he debuted in 1969. He played his entire 11-year career with the Yankees, and that wasn't an era of free agency. So many people were switching teams. So after starting in 1970s, he became the starter. They had dealt catcher Frank Fernandez, in free agency, went to the A's, and he won that AL Rookie of the Year, batting .302. The Rookie of the Year was first given in 1947, and at that time, Munson was the first catcher. There's only been 3 American League catchers to ever won: Munson, Sandy Alomar Jr. in 1990, and of course Carlton Fisk, who I think we're going to hear more about later, right, Griff?
Yeah, definitely talk about it. And even with winning Rookie of the Year, definitely some impressive stats just coming into the league with the .302 batting average, I believe, for his rookie year.
So he was incredible, and I was too young to remember him as a rookie. But certainly I remember his just clutch performances in the playoffs. He was in a total of 3 World Series: 76, when they lost to the Big Red Machine of the Cincinnati Reds. And of course, in 77 and 78, they beat the Dodgers both times, 4-2.
Hopefully we can bring back some of that luck of beating the Dodgers to current times, because Lord knows we need all the help we can get against the Dodgers.
I'm still having kind of a little post-traumatic stuff from the World Series. Game 5 2 years ago. Oh, my gosh. Don't even mention it. Well, in the playoffs, Thurman was clutch. In the 76 World Series loss, Munson actually hit .529. And then a record 6 consecutive World Series hits. Since then, it's been past record 1990. Billy Hatcher was 7. In the 78 World Series, he was .320. He had 8 hits, 7 RBIs. So, in the postseason, a .357 average, 22 RBIs in 30 postseason games. Fantastic. And he really played well in the Royals, eliminating them from the American League playoff each time they went to the series. Let's go into Munson's tough, gruff attitude, and especially his beef. He had beef, and other people had beef with him. Griffin, tell me about some of the beef that you've heard about.
Well, as we talked about with kind of his harder to portray in the media kind of way he was, definitely had some beef with other big catchers at the time. So as you mentioned, them getting beaten by the Reds. So definitely some beef with Johnny Bench, who I believe there was a quote saying that from one of the managers after the World Series of how what was it? Someone was making a mistake trying to compare Munson to Johnny Bench, because you never compare anyone to Johnny.
Yes, Sparky Anderson of the Reds. And I think he wrote a letter to Munson afterward, but I think he was just trying to defend his catcher. He loved Johnny Bench, Sparky Anderson. We should do an episode on Sparky, Brooke. But Munson, despite the apology, Munson took it to heart. And you mentioned a couple catchers. The other great I mean, what an era for catchers, by the way, because you had Bench, you had Munson, and then you had Griff.
Carlton Fisk, who
Fisk of the Red
played
Sox,
for the rival Red Sox, and I definitely don't think that helped to take away from the tension between them. But as well with that, as you mentioned, Thurman Munson won Rookie of the Year, and later on, Carlton Fisk comes in and wins Rookie of the Year, but he does it unanimously.
Right.
So I know that was definitely a little bit of a starting point for their rivalry to begin. But along with that, just Fisk was definitely more cleaner cut. I know as far as media, there were people that would, I guess, hype him up a little bit better than Thurman Munson, specifically some Red Sox commentators. And early on in his career, he got featured on Sports Illustrated 2 times to Munson, who had never been featured, despite very quickly making a name for himself in the MLB world.
Yeah, I mean, more photogenic. You mentioned, the commentator, Kurt Gowdy on the NBC Game of the Week. Yeah, he was a former Red Sox commentator. So Munson really talked people up a lot more than he got credit for. Well, you and I spoke beforehand, and I know you've seen the footage in 1973, August 1973, where Munson and Fisk, Munson then on the bases, Fisk behind the plate, had a little altercation. Do you remember that?
Yeah, so I couldn't find the 1973 video, but there were plenty of pictures and stories about it where, man, I think the first picture I saw is just Munson barreling into Fisk after a failed bunt. So he just came barreling in, realizing he was going to come out, and I think the picture is just Munson putting his forearms just straight into Fisk's face, and knowing that, reading stories about it, he comes up and immediately just a brawl ensues. I think it was, from what I heard, 10 minutes long, and I know that eventually led to another fight later on, which they do have a video on from 1976. But I believe there was a quote from one of the pitchers who was saying that it was like watching 2 hookers fighting on 45th Street.
Oh, gosh.
So I don't think that set well.
Can we say that, bro? We say that? I don't think we paid for the podcast, the graphic podcast. Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned it was a sacrifice squeeze, So basically, Gene Michael went up to the plate to bunt. Thurman was on third. I think Felipe Alou was on first, and basically, Thurman was running, and Gene Michael completely whiffed on the bunt. But Thurman was on his way, and rather than be like, all right, I'm out. This was the 70s. This is very different. Now you can't pile into catchers like the Buster Posey injury years back. You could just go, boom. And certainly people like Pete Rose and Thurman Munson did that, and it was a fun era. I don't know if it was right, but it was still a fun era to be a kid and watch.
Yes, and as well with the video leading to the 1976 fight. That one you can find that online, and I believe that it was Lou Piniella who was running into home plate, and again, Carlton Fisk gets run over, and man, I don't think I've ever seen the benches clear that quickly. It seems like everyone from both teams were out in the middle, and actually led to, I believe, was it Bill Lee, the pitcher?
Bill Spaceman Lee. Yeah.
Yeah, it led to him getting body slammed, and he first walks away, but then comes back to talk badly to some Yankees players, and then gets kicked on the ground and has to walk away with a torn ligament in his shoulder. So even some of these fights were changing the careers of some of these Red Sox and Yankees players. So
yeah, pitchers should never get involved in fights. They should stand by the back and pretend and just trash talk. So yeah, I mean this was a feature, and just Munson as the team leader. I mean, first of all, to get himself going, but also to inspire his team. In '75, playing the Orioles, the pitcher at the time was Mike Torres, and who would later become Munson's teammate, and then also eventually become a Red Sox. We talked about him in the 1978 episode, but Torres had had gotten, I think, buzzed a pitch by Thurman, and then the next time at bat, he blew kisses to Munson, and Munson just didn't like that. Maybe it was just a nice gesture, but Munson didn't take it as such. And of course,
I find it hard to see it that way.
Now, of course, that's the rival team, the Red Sox, and of course the O's there. But even within the team, the Yankees of that era was termed by the Sparky Lyle book that would come out, the Bronx Zoo. And so there was some even tension in the clubhouse. So we get to Reggie.
And Mr. October.
Mr. October. And they had some beef as well. Griff, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So before Reggie got brought to the Yankees, Thurman Munson actually spoke up a lot to Steinbrenner, saying, like, this is the guy we need.
Yeah.
So
they had just lost the 76 World Series against the Reds. So they needed something. They needed a little more pop.
Yeah. Needed that extra spark for them. And so Munson actually spoke up, letting Steinbrenner know that, hey, like, you should go get this Reggie Jackson guy. And so they do. They end up getting him off of free agency. And around the time, right after Reggie Jackson began to play for the Yankees, I believe he was quoted saying of how I don't want to misquote this, and I have it written down somewhere. But he says, I'm the straw that stirs the drinks. And in a 9-page interview, then proceeds to say, now Munson thinks he can be the straw that stirs the drink, but he can only stir it bad. So immediately, right off the bat, there was definitely some sour relationship between them. And another Yankees player at the time commented Munson, like maybe he was misquoted, and I believe Munson ended up saying, "What, misquoted for 9 pages?" So he didn't take that as well, especially coming from his new teammate who he fought for. But of course, led on to some great history to be made with 2 future back-to-back World Series.
Yeah, you mentioned it was before he even started playing with the team. Reggie had, of course, was part of that killer athletics team that had won, 3 consecutive World Series in the early 70s. And yeah, that's quite a way to start your career with your new team. And all of those guys, they loved Munson. So, Jackson wasn't just insulting one guy. I mean, many people took it personally. And I think you were very kind to say what Munson has said with, I think he used a few expletives with disbelief that Jackson was misquoted. Jackson to this day does say that he was taken out of context. And I will say this, that years later, sports writer Mike Lupica asked Reggie who was the greatest player he ever played with, and without delay, Reggie said Thurman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and after Munson's passing, Reggie was quoted saying that they probably would have won 2 more World Series had he not tragically passed away, or definitely earlier than he should have.
Yeah. It was. Now, winning, of course, helped patch that clubhouse together. Mm-hmm. They would win there in 77 and 78. And, of course, I think that Munson was able to overlook a lot of the differences in their characters and personalities when Reggie would do stuff like hit 3 home runs in Game 6 mm-hmm. of the 77 series there. Well, 1970s baseball stories and beef is fun, but Munson just wasn't a tremendous leader or personality. He was a tremendous player. We mentioned he was in 3 World Series with 2 victories. You mentioned the 1970 Rookie of the Year. He won American League MVP in 1976, and he was a 7-time All-Star, including 6 straight. Also, 3 straight Gold Gloves, in the defensive role as catcher from 73 to 75. So he had these numbers, and if you take all the folks that have a Rookie of the Year and an MVP and World Series victories, there might be like 30 guys, but 30 with just MVPs and Rookie of the Years, far less with World Series wins. Thurman Munson's not in the Hall of Fame. And that's something that has upset myself and a lot of Yankee fans, because we think that shorter career really, really affected judgment. And also that voters probably look a little more at the home run numbers and the flash rather than maybe putting Thurman's candidacy in context.
Yeah, that definitely amazed me that he was in the Hall of Fame because, as you said, with all the accolades, and being statistically a great player in the postseason and batting well and being a great defensive player during the regular seasons as well that he played. Yeah, it was really crazy to see. Of course, he wasn't in the Hall of Fame, but as you mentioned, with a shorter career, sometimes I guess the Hall of Fame voters are looking for longevity rather than just the height of you at your peak.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting in a couple years when the former Giants catcher Buster Posey comes up. Mm-hmm. He won 3 World Series instead of 2, but also had that Rookie of the Year MVP and has very comparable numbers to Thurman. And he only retired after 12 years. So very similar length. I think Posey's going to get in, first ballot, which then brings up the Thurman question again of, hey, similar numbers, similar short career. Why isn't Thurman in? So, well, despite the gruff, quiet exterior, Munson was a devoted family man. He had met his wife in grade school. He had 3 kids, and he was so devoted to them that he wanted to go back to Canton, and he actually got his pilot's license to go back and forth. And his wife would say that he would come back 2 or 3 times a week, even just to put the kids to bed. Unfortunately, as he maybe got moved on to a jet, his flying skills maybe weren't what they should have been, and that led to his death, as Griffin pointed out. Griffin, that was August 2nd, 1979, at Akron Canton Airport. And again, I'm sure you've read a lot about that too.
Yeah, it's definitely tragic of how soon it happened, especially in his life, and trying to achieve something to be closer to his family as well. I would definitely, I read afterwards, and there's an interview of Steinbrenner talking about it, but he had the funeral in Ohio, and whenever it came up, all the Yankees, the entire team, decided to fly out, and everyone attended the funeral. And Steinbrenner questioned, like, hey, what happens if y'all don't make it back for the game? And they said, well, we'll forfeit. And I think that really shows to us much of how he was as a captain, as a player, as a teammate, showing that whole team wanted to be there after his passing and were willing to give up the game, even if it meant just being together as a team and celebrating him for the time they spent and had with him as a captain.
Yankees fans were devastated. I mean, Thurman didn't have a great year in 79. He had actually contemplated retirement. He had floated out maybe switching to the Cleveland Indians to be closer to home, but I don't think there was anything that was really going to happen. And yeah, just in practicing landings and takeoffs, the plane crashed, burst into flames. Yankees fans were just devastated. And right afterward, his number 15, was retired immediately by the Yankees. He would be given a monument in the Monument Park at Yankee Stadium, and his locker would be sealed off. It stayed in the clubhouse, number 15's locker, but no one was allowed to use it all the way until 2009. Derek Jeter had the next locker over. He said they would come in and see that empty locker, every day, which was quite a testament to what Munson meant to that team. With the new Yankee Stadium opening in 2009, they actually moved the locker to the Yankees Museum there. We've seen it, right, Griff?
We have, yeah. So, and supposedly exactly in the way that it was at the old stadium, jersey still hanging up, and just, as you said, still shows the testament comparing of who he was, comparing that, had it for, I believe, almost 30 years in old Yankee Stadium unoccupied, and then to move it there and still have it on display for everyone to see. Really, really powerful for the Yankees to do that for their captain, and of course someone who was very beloved by fans and the team.
Right. Well, of course, I don't want to end on a downbeat note, so I mean, let's bring some interesting things about Munson up. Last week's episode, we actually talked about the brief failed attempt of the Yankees to introduce a mascot, Dandy, who had an odd resemblance to Thurman with the mustache. And he only lasted a couple of years there because after Munson's passing, I think he was quickly phased out. He also came up recently with ABS and pitch reviews this year. Munson was constantly touching his helmet, tapping his helmet, moving. It was one of his mannerisms when he went up to the plate. So the announcer, Michael Kay, who does the Yankee games, was like, how would you know if he's protesting a pitch? Because he's always doing that. And then finally, I want to end with a story Griffin is very well aware of. I remember going to bat day at Yankee Stadium as a kid. And at that time, they didn't give the little mini bats away. They gave full-size bats there, which, again, in the 70s, you were taking your lives in your own hand. And I got a full-size Thurman Munson bat. And, oh my gosh, I love that thing. Back then, we were not as concerned about resale value and eBay. So I used to go out and play, in the streets with it, and hitting balls. And my mom has it somewhere, but can't find it. I'm skeptical. She may have given it away to some neighborhood kid and just doesn't want to admit it. Griff, you tried to sneak upstairs and get it for me, right?
I wasn't trying to get it. I was just trying to see what your room was like. But that was very short lived. But yeah, if you can get it back, you can toss it in with your collection of World Series bats.
We can. So. We're going to hang those up.
Heck yeah, get right behind you.
Yeah, look, I don't have the bat. That's all I know. And I know my mom doesn't throw away anything. So I got to get that bat.
I'll have to do another mission to sneak up there, and I'll risk getting chewed out for it.
Well, thanks so much to Griffin for joining us today. I'm just delighted he came on to talk about, again, my favorite player growing up. We went a bit long, of course, but it was a special episode to me. Thanks always to our listeners, including my sister Kelly, who probably isn't listening. She says she's got to catch up with episodes. So in about 4 months, this episode will surprise her when she gets that shout out. But we're always happy you're listening, and I hope you keep listening. And like us on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe. This is Jerry Dynes with Griffin and Brooke. Thank you, Brooke. And heading back to the locker rooms today at Fungos and Fastballs.